Webcomics and video game parodies. Two things that are an unmistakable aspect of the late 2000s, early 2010s era internet. I have a decent amount of experience with both these things. I used to watch a good amount of video game parody content back in the day, mainly through YouTube. And for webcomics, well, I'm a webcomic creator myself. But what happens when you combine these two things? Well, most of the time, you get a pretty standard gag-a-day strip that mixes video game characters with, let's be real, usually pretty raunchy humor. But what if there was a webcomic, one that defied the usual conventions of its contemporaries and made something truly special? To answer that question, I gotta ask. Hey, does anyone remember Brawl in the Family? First created in the late 2000s by Matthew Toronto with the help of his friend Chris, Brawl in the Family became a webcomic that would soon be known as a certified classic. It's a silly little comic centered around the cast of Super Smash Bros. Brawl, but mainly these guys. The comic published its final strip in 2014, but it is still fondly remembered to this day. Funny story, when doing research for this video, I noticed that there was a Kickstarter to make a final run of the book editions of the comic. Curious, I checked it out. Oh, look at that. The Brawl in the Family Kickstarter in 2024? Looks like there's a set goal of $50,000? I wonder if it made its... Oh! That's enough for all the stretch goals. And $50,000 extra. This right here showed me that there are still plenty of people who care about the comic. It also showed me that, gosh darn it! I had a chance to own a physical copy of the comics, and I missed out again! No! If it's been a while since you've given the comic a read, or if you've perhaps never read it at all, let me give you a quick summary of its progression. Brawl in the Family was first posted in 2008, with its first 100-ish strips generally being a gag comic rendered in this truly spectacular blue and white. Many of this initial batch of comics depicted a simple structure. Kirby eat thing, consequence. Even though the comic would evolve much over the course of its run, this specific type of joke never went away entirely. Around comic 100, a good amount of experimentation happens. Comics get longer, the art style shifts, and there's even some songs popping up. By comic 200, the series has solidified its voice with the introduction of more ambitious entries, and characters that would be a staple to the comic's identity. The comic continues to coast like this for a very long time, with some bumps in the road around comic 400 as Matthew was struggling with some medical issues at the time. Despite this, the comic's quality gets even better, with more songs, more ambitious stories, and even better art. After 6 years, Brawl in the Family ends with a solid run of exactly 600 comics. Okay, but is it funny? I'd say so, yeah. The comic mainly has stuff that will make you do the small nose exhale instead of laughing out loud. Of course, some of these do genuinely get a bit of a giggle. Look at this panel of Snake. Beautiful. My favorite kind of jokes are the ones that are just so dumb. Like this one, number 128. The joke is so stupid and so obvious, but darn it if that is not my humor. The caption of this comic really adds to the experience, I feel. In one of these author's notes, Matthew stated that if he thinks of a joke that is so stupid, it therefore has to be put in the comic. Big mood, I do that too with these videos. Sometimes, upon rereading, I would come across jokes that I didn't really get when I first read this series in middle school, but I do get now. Take this one about Fire Emblem Sacred Stones. It has its joke centered around Seth, a character known for being one of the most broken units in Fire Emblem history. It's not uncommon to say that many Nintendo franchises can be lighter on story, and the ones that are don't really focus on comedy. As such, any webcomic like Brawl in the Family has to naturally take a few steps away from canon. That said, I'd say that the cast feel pretty in character for the most part, which I think is a choice that is super beneficial. A problem I have with a lot of parody content from this era is that the characters being parodied frequently act so out of character in order for the joke to work. Which makes me ask, what's the point of using these specific characters in the first place? Brawl in the Family avoids this problem. It's not going for the your favorite characters, but they're dark and messed up. Just a glimpse into my dark reality thing. So this approach makes more sense anyway. The comic instead opts to do things like combine elements from different video game universes or play around with character dynamics. And even when there's new ideas, they're cool and epic and add to the charm and identity of the comic. Some of these things are the additions of songs and story arcs, but I'll discuss those in later sections. I mainly want to talk about some characters. Some of these new things are just unique additions to the lore that keep popping up now and again, like Kirby and Jigglypuff being a couple, or Waluigi being like that. There's also original characters here, like Dee Dee Doo, who is this silly anti-joke character turned Easter egg. I also like Irio. Irio is epic. I really vibe with the character of Irio. Sometimes a character was technically made by Nintendo first, but they're used so much more in the comic than the respective franchise ever did with them that I don't care. I associate them more with the comic now. Like, Adeline's just Matthew's OC now. Oh, that reminds me. Okay, so about Adeline for a second. I'm going to tell you a story about that one time Brawl and the Family had an irreversible, hyper-specific impact on my art. Okay, so in middle school, I was taking a creative writing class and had just been assigned our final assignment, which was writing a play. I sketched out an idea for my main character, who was this plucky, young detective girl having to deal with adults that don't take her very seriously. When picking a name for her, I noticed that she kinda looked like Adeline from Brawl and the Family. So I went, yeah, sure, let's name it Adeline. Except for changing the spelling of it slightly, for some reason. It was pretty fitting, actually, because this play basically took place in a knockoff Mushroom Kingdom where characters were not so subtle analogs for video game characters. Mario was canonically dead. So, flash forward to later when I needed to come up with a name for another OC, I reused the name and general look from this very cool short story. And bam! It's a character I've had ever since. Even now, my most recent drawings of Adeline still show some DNA from her inspiration. Speaking of artwork, let's get back to the comic, shall we? I didn't actually expect to need to make a section for this topic, since I always remembered Brawl and the Family having a pretty consistent style. Upon rereading, I realized that the comic's art style changed about as much as my own style did in the same time frame. The comic starts out drawn in this basic blue and white style, with shaky looking lines as a result of Matthew trying to get used to his drawing tablet. According to a Reddit AMA, Matthew went with a blue and white style instead of the more standard black and white style to avoid the comic looking sterile, as he puts it. This worked out well for him, as the blue and white ended up being a recognizable feature when comics were passed around onto other sites. Even in this beginning period, it was clear that Matthew still had some skill with drawing. For example, Comic 50 is a super spot-on homage to Calvin and Hobbes. The art style first shifts between comics 50 to 100 to this sketchy style, and then shifts again from comics 100 to 200 into something more self-shaded. The sketchy style actually worked quite well for some of the more surreal, or well, cursed imagery in the comic, which would be a technique that would pop up later from time to time. The shift to cell shading is more in line with the Brawl and the Family that I remember, but even after that switch, the comic still uses that as a base to experiment. The way the characters are shaded, how color is handled, and how the characters are stylized settles into something more consistent the longer the comic goes on. That is not unusual for comic strips. It's perfectly natural to improve a good amount when you're drawing every day, especially for a comic like Brawl and the Family where you'd be drawing all different kinds of stuff. As someone who has a track record right now of adjusting my comics art style every 6 months, it's nice to see that a comic I admire do the same thing. The way that when listening back to these old songs, the lyrics suddenly came back to me, like something deep and sinister locked deep in the back of my mind. So, this is something that's unusual for webcomics in general, which are full-on musical numbers. These were written and performed by Matthew and friends, with the music directly complemented by the accompanying visuals in the comic itself. On the website, you can click a handy-dandy little play button and read along to the comic while listening to the song play. The only other webcomic I've heard of ever having music be a big part of its identity is this one called Homestuck, but that one's kind of niche, so maybe you've never heard of it. Because songs have a tendency to stick in your head, they are one of the main ways this comic worms its way into my mind from time to time. Every December, without fail, the stupid freaking Ganondorf All I Want for Christmas Is You cover gets stuck in my head for a long while, without fail. I think it's my punishment for actively avoiding the original. Like, I'll just be putting up Christmas decorations and I'll be like, fill the land with monsters. While working on this video, I kept thinking about Ode to Minions. This one was a group effort with multiple people lending a hand to make the music. Shout out to Matthew's mom. She freaking nails that line delivery. I also would like to point out how freaking sad Bowser looks here. Wet cat looking man. Like Ode to Minions, The History of Nintendo is one of our 3 completely original songs, and one that got an updated version in 2024 that added even more detail packed into a punch. This feels the most like a time capsule more than anything else in the comic to me. There's the obvious reason that the song's recounting of history ends with the Wii U being this mysterious new thing that people were anticipating. That's all I'm gonna say about that. It also speaks to an era where people just unabashedly liked Nintendo, which we don't quite have right now, but that doesn't matter. I actually learned something upon rewatch. I didn't know the GameCube was so controversial on release. I think my favorite song is the very last song, or you could say the one final song. The final part, where various characters sing the different melodies to the previous songs, was pulled off really well, and a really nice tribute to one of the best parts of the comic. After Brawl and the Family officially ended, Matthew went on to make more of these video game-themed songs, and also some Waluigi song covers that got inexplicably popular. These are better than any AI song cover video. The songs seem like a part of the comic that were especially fun to put together, so I'm glad that was something that Matthew kept doing. This was the other part of the comic I was especially excited to revisit, and that is the multi-part storylines. These are a lot of fun, and act as a nice change of pace to the usual goofs and gaffs. Many of these are riffing off of pre-existing stories, but never without their own unique flair. My favorite of these types of stories is the Christmas Carol adaptation. You'd think that A Christmas Carol would be a narrative done to death with adaptations at this point, but I really like the comic's take on it. Having the story take place in a timeline where Bowser is defeated is an interesting hook, and Mario's descent into cynicism and subsequent redemption feel pretty believable. Real sentence in the script, by the way. There's also a good amount of comedy here and there to keep the tone consistent with the rest of the comic for the most part, but never distracting from an actual emotional beat. Thank you for that. Let me get actually emotional at freaking old Mario and Peach reuniting over many years. Yes, which did happen when I reread this because I'm a sucker who gets weepy very easy. This arc was posted right after Ode to Minions, and I think it's these two things that really cemented the comic into iconic territory for me. There's also some original storylines here too. One comic that is not a multi-part series, but is basically as long as one, is The Captive Princess, number 260. It's a huge chunk of a comic that tells a complete story about Princess Peach taking it upon herself to escape from captivity. This one's a sweet story. According to a Brawl in the Family podcast episode, Peach's characterization was inspired by how she's depicted in the Paper Mario games at the time, where she got to be crafty and capable in her own ways. And I like how those aspects of her are incorporated here. She is neither #girlboss nor completely helpless, but rather portrayed as a real person having to use the tools she has to overcome a set of obstacles. I like how in the end, despite her overcoming these obstacles, she decides to not make it known to Mario, instead just thanking him. It's a wonderful in-character decision for her, given that 1, she's just gracious like that, and 2, she's well aware of all that he had to go through to get to Bowser's castle, especially after experiencing some of the perils herself over the course of this story. I think the fan-favorite arc is the Cocoon Academy, which I totally get. I feel like this is likely not the first, and definitely not the last, piece of video game parody media to do the video game characters in high school thing, but I like this interpretation. A part of this arc that's always stuck with me is, oddly enough, this part in the middle with Meta Knight and DDD receiving different speeches about what being a hero means. As a reminder, these two characters are about to decide how they're going to respond in the face of a big threat to the school showing up. The speeches fit the characters giving them, set up what the two boys receiving the speeches are going to grow up to be, and genuinely have some nice commentary about the importance of doing good things for the right reasons. It cooks, what can I say? The story arc ended up becoming official Brawl in the Family canon, with the events of that story being referenced for the later It's a Plunderful Life arc, where what happens to Meta Knight is changed because DDD wasn't there to be his friend back in the academy. Even the very final story arc gives a nod to this, as it starts with the characters partaking in a class reunion. Also, I really like how the last story arc handled the multiple art style shifts. It's a cool visual to end on, it's a smart way to tie in the final message of the comic. Doing longer story arcs can be a gamble for comics like this. You risk putting in a lot of effort only to potentially be met by a swath of people who Just kinda wish you went back to the funnies. Given that the fans look back on these arcs as highlights of the whole comic's run, it was time well spent, and then some. I'm glad Matthew took the gambit to tell these longer stories with the medium. There was a genuine ambition to tell a good story without straying from the tone too much, but also never allowing the comedy to undercut the narratives. It's through this balance why the comic is so fondly remembered. It's, above anything else, sincere. Back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, there was an uptick in media that decided to have an air of irony to its tone. Whether that be through self-referential humor, an unserious tone, or just a general sense that the creators were well aware of the common tropes and patterns that the audiences were so used to and perhaps sick of. When this first started popping up, it was considered a nice change of pace. Dare I say subversive. These days, well, I'm probably not the first to tell you that the public has gotten sick of quote-unquote irony-poisoned media. Sure, something that is self-aware can be a lot of fun and lead to different storytelling possibilities, but it frequently gets warped to the point where the irony feels like it's just a mask to run from engaging with a potentially more emotionally impactful story. That's what made Brawl and the Family age so gracefully. You could call the comic a parody of video games, but you never doubted that the creator actually liked what he's parodying. In addition, he's not afraid to take risks with the comic and put his more out there ideas out there. Whether that be to add original characters to the comic, to sing songs, or to tell stories that are earnestly conveying a message. Sure, there's always silliness, but it's never to deflect from sincerity, but instead it's part of it. So, the comic is dead. Has been for over 10 years. But it's nice to know that Matthew is still around making stuff, and it's still video game related. He still makes comics for a fan magazine called Nintendo Force, and heck, he just announced that he's making a Paper Mario themed cookbook. Very cool, very cool. I'm glad that he and his family seem to be doing well. I wish him the best. I'm gonna be honest, working on this video was kind of a struggle. Reading through the comic again was a pleasant experience, but I was worried it was one that I would end up not having a lot of stuff to say about. However, I kept having moments that proved me wrong again and again. Articulating why the comic was so special would stir up emotions in me that I can only describe as passion. I do truly owe this comic a lot of things, huh? When I was younger, Brawl and the Family showed me that making comics for the internet, one simply about a topic you're passionate about, is a viable way to create. And now, I'm reminded once again of that simple, earnest joy of creation. Sometimes I get so stuck within my creative routines that I forget that making cool stuff, weird stuff, is freaking awesome. So, here's to Brawl and the Family. Thanks for the memories.
Well, folks, I guess that's it. Time to wrap it up. But I'd like to thank you for all these years.